All right, welcome back. Thanks again for joining us. Now, over the past 19 months or so, the Oscar Pistorius murder trial has made headlines all over the world. Television, radio, print media, even social media houses have scrutinized every single moment of this high-profile case. And the constant coverage of this trial now begs the question, has there been a case of trial by media? Well, here to help us answer this and many other questions is award-winning journalist and founder of Frey Intermedia, a pan-African media training company, Paula Frey. A very good morning to you. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ayanda.
Paula, it's been called the trial of the decade, some going as far as saying the trial of the century. Media profiling of this particular case has been huge.
It's been absolutely huge. And part of the reason is because of the changing nature of the media, actually. I mean, on the one hand, yes, it is a major story about a celebrity, but it's also about people's access to information. And this trial has actually shown us just exactly the way media has changed over the last decade or so.
Indeed, it's also brought us into how the legal institution in South Africa functions. So a heavy spotlight on that as well. We had many of the proceedings in camera, some of the witnesses refusing to appear in camera, but it's changed dynamic somewhat. The role of the media in this case, what do you think it's been?
Well, it's been very interesting because I think that there has been exposure for ordinary South Africans on how the judiciary works, how justice in South Africa plays out. I mean, obviously, there are criticisms around that in terms of that this is a very high-profile, very well-resourced case, both from a defense and from a prosecution point of view. But the interest from ordinary people in the way justice works has been phenomenal. So I think what's happened is that the media has played quite a crucial role in being able to expose the inner workings of the court. Whether they've done a good enough role in terms of explaining the kinds of things that are being considered, etc., is another matter altogether.
Yeah, I think let's delve a little bit deeper in that. Has the media in South Africa given Oscar Pistorius a fair trial, do you think? I know some people were a bit apprehensive about having this play out in the media because they said perhaps some witnesses will, second guess themselves or be worried about the cameras. Do you think South African media has given him a fair trial?
Well, I think that we need to look at what checks and balances the judge actually put in place in terms of having such a high-profile case being open to the media. First of all, it's not unusual for media to cover cases. What's unusual in this particular case is the fact that it was televised, that journalists were able to tweet from it, although there were restrictions. So if a witness did not want to be televised, they weren't, and there were certain areas where you couldn't actually tweet from the court case. But we don't have a jury system. So there's not really a jury to influence in terms of when the when the judgment is made. And in fact, the judge has two assessors to guide her. But we assume and we expect, in fact, that judge has the skills and the expertise to be able to. And in fact, she has a reputation for being a stickler for detail, very, very fair. So we can expect that she's not being influenced by what's playing out in the media. The difficulty, of course, is that there are two families whose lives have been destroyed by this, whose lives are now being put on a not South African stage but a global stage. I think the statistics are about 100 million people are expected to tune in today, and the interest is not just South Africa, it's also America. We've got Australian journalists here, European journalists here, so this is a global story. And that, in fact, is the biggest change. From a media perspective, we can expect that our stories that local actually becomes global in this new environment.
Some have even said that the coverage that is being experienced by this trial rivals the funeral of Utata Nelson Mandela, rivals that of the O.J. Simpson trial as well. Is this a precedent-setting trial, do you think it is?
Well, for South African media, it's a definite game changer in the sense that this story was broken on Twitter. It was broken on Twitter by Beeld newspaper, and other media followed suit. It has played out on social media. You've seen print media moving into an online space, moving on to doing television little inserts on their own space. You've seen radios starting up video components to it. And it really recognizes the dynamic shift in media globally, not just in South Africa, when breaking news is digital. News breaks on social media, and then it goes onto radio and onto television, and the next day into the newspaper. So it fundamentally changes the way we consume news, but also what we expect from news. Because if I'm watching the trial unfold during the day, I more or less know what's happened. And so the next day, I want analysis. But I can also say, hang on a second, that's not what happened. I was watching, I saw, and you're not writing the right thing.
And that happens on a number of occasions where you say, I disagree with that particular viewpoint. But perhaps another viewpoint that people can disagree with is the handling of the case by journalists. And I'll tell you why I say that. South Africa, to me, seems to be a very controversial, not controversial, but conservative culture of journalists, other than the paparazzi, unlike the paparazzi in the US that will mob you down and camp outside your house. But we've seen a lot of that creeping up. In fact, Judge Masipa has had to rebuke a couple of media houses, saying if something is embargoed, it's embargoed. When it comes to the procedures and perhaps the way we carry ourselves as journalists in South Africa, do you think that also has changed from this trial?
Well, you know, if you think of the large numbers of journalists who covered this trial, not just African journalists, but also international journalists, if you think of the huge amount of coverage that it actually received, then the number of incidences, which basically we can count on, you know, on our hand, on our fingers, are very, very small in comparison. We should be mindful of that and not kind of extrapolate one incident as an example of media in general. But I do think also that media are testing how far can they report, how far can they push the sub judice rule, for example, in terms of what they can and can't report.
Yeah, and when it comes to the court of public opinion, I know you've just mentioned that it won't sway Judge Masipa's decision. She's got a credible record. But when it comes to how the public feels, and like you rightly said, it affecting the family, do you think the media has gone out purposefully to try and portray a guilty or perhaps a not guilty verdict?
Well, you know, I think that the media would be very, very careful of not being in contempt of court and prejudging the decision as much as possible. I think that this is an emotive case, that there will be opinions either way. You know, it won't take the media to actually go guilty or not guilty for people to actually express their views out on social media. I think everyone has an opinion on this case, including probably you and I. And I think that's what trickles down into social media and into public spaces.
And it's changed somewhat now, but I know in the beginning the media was heavily criticized for focusing too much on Oscar Pistorius and neglecting the fact that a young lady, Riva Steenkamp, has been killed. Do you think that's still the case?
Well, one of the greatest challenges, I think, for journalists is to be able to use this case to raise awareness of gender-based violence, or just to raise the awareness of violence and crime in South Africa generally, to be able to take us out of this courtroom and then to look at the issues that it's unearthed at a greater, in a greater way. And I think that's the challenge for South African journalists now, is when this court case is finished, what do we do?
And the term allegedly, I mean, I tripped up over it once or twice now as well, and where it fits, the legalese, the jargon that's used, that's something that's been brought down to grassroots level as well for South Africans to be able to understand as well. Do you think that it's been very educational in terms of how we function as a judiciary in South Africa?
Well, it's been quite interesting because this court case has actually been shown across the continent. And so I do a lot of training out of South Africa, and whenever I go to Nairobi, to Tanzania, or to Zimbabwe, people, first thing that they ask me is, so tell me about the Oscar Pistorius case. What's going to happen? And they can tell me in great detail the legal issues that have been played out, the arguments, etc. So I think that there has been certainly an educational role with this trial.
We're going to have to leave it there. You and I can carry on until the cows come home with regard to that. Just taking a look at the media aspect, be it radio, TV, print, social media, when it comes to the Oscar Pistorius trial. That was award-winning journalist and founder of Frey Intermedia, a Pan-African media training company, Paula Frey. Quick ad break. Morning Live continues.